Washington, oppressive heat. Inside Blair House, President Harry S. Truman is resting after lunch in his underwear, trying to escape the heavy air inside the building. Then gunfire erupts outside. Not a single shot. A barrage. Secret Service agents fire back almost immediately as pedestrians dive onto the sidewalk. Bullets slam into the stone facade of the residence and shatter windows facing Pennsylvania Avenue. Truman hears the shooting and walks toward the window to see what is happening below. It is an unbelievably dangerous mistake. One of the attackers is standing almost directly underneath him with a pistol already drawn. On the street below, a wounded police officer looks up, sees the president in the window, and screams, "Get back! Get back!" Only then does Truman step away from the glass. For several seconds, the President of the United States stands exposed in an open window while armed men are firing only meters away. One turn of a gun barrel, and the story ends there. The attack became possible largely because Truman was not living in the White House. By 1950, the building had become structurally dangerous. Floors were sagging, walls were cracking, and engineers warned that parts of the residence were at risk of collapse. During one inspection, a massive chandelier nearly crashed through the ceiling, so Truman was temporarily moved across the street to Blair House. But Blair House was never designed to function as a hardened presidential residence. It was essentially a 4-story brick townhouse sitting directly beside Pennsylvania Avenue. The windows of Truman's bedroom faced an active public sidewalk where pedestrians passed only meters away from the president every day. That afternoon, 2 Puerto Rican nationalists approached the residence carrying 3 pistols and exactly 69 rounds of ammunition hidden under their clothes. They did not need to breach fences or pass military checkpoints. They simply walked down an ordinary city sidewalk toward the president's temporary home, and security realized the danger only seconds before the shooting started. The attack begins with a mechanical failure. One of the gunmen, Oscar Collazo, walks up behind White House police officer Donald Birdsell near the front steps of Blair House. Hidden under his jacket is a German Walther P-38 pistol. Collazo raises the weapon and pulls the trigger directly at Birdsell's back. Click. Nothing happens. The pistol misfires. For a split second, Collazo freezes. Then he panics and violently racks the slide, trying to chamber another round while Birdsell turns around toward him. This time, the gun fires. The bullet tears into Birdsell's knee. And suddenly, the entire entrance explodes into gunfire. Secret Service agents and police open fire from only a few meters away. Bullets crack against the stone steps of Blair House and ricochet across the entrance area as pedestrians dive behind cars and concrete barriers. At this distance, nobody has cover for long. The fight turns deadly almost instantly. At nearly the same moment, the second attacker, Griselio Torresola, moves toward the guard booth on the other side of Blair House, carrying a German Luger P-08 pistol. Unlike Collazo, Torresola is calm and extremely accurate. Within seconds, he shoots 3 officers at close range. White House police officer Leslie Koffelt takes multiple bullets to the chest and abdomen before collapsing inside the guard booth. Blood quickly spreads across the floor as the gunfight continues outside. Torresola believes the path to the residence is now open. He starts moving toward the front steps, but Koffelt is still alive. Barely conscious and dying from his wounds, he suddenly regains awareness inside the booth. With almost no strength left, he pulls himself up, raises his revolver, and aims through the doorway. The distance is roughly 10 meters. Koffelt fires once. The bullet strikes Torresola in the head, just behind the ear. The attacker collapses onto the lawn outside Blair House. The entire gunfight lasts less than a minute. And that single shot likely saves the president's life. The gunfight outside Blair House is over in less than a minute, but the cost is enormous. Inside a Washington hospital, White House police officer Leslie Koffelt is dying from multiple gunshot wounds. Doctors attempt emergency surgery, but the damage is too severe. Hours after firing the shot that stopped Torresola, Koffelt dies on the operating table. He becomes the only member of presidential security in American history killed while directly defending a sitting president from an assassination attempt. The two attackers are quickly identified as Puerto Rican nationalists, Oscar Collazo and Griselio Torresola. At the time, Puerto Rico is under U.S. control, and nationalist uprisings for independence have recently been crushed by authorities. Anger toward Washington is boiling. For the attackers, Truman himself is almost irrelevant. He is simply the symbol inside the building, the face of American power. They did not travel to Washington expecting to escape. They came to stage a violent political statement in front of the entire country. And for 40 seconds, they nearly succeeded in reaching the president. Oscar Collazo survives the shootout despite being shot in the chest during the attack. Within days, he begins recovering under heavy guard while federal investigators prepare one of the most high-profile trials in the country. The verdict comes quickly. Guilty. The court sentences Collazo to death in the electric chair. But then Truman makes an unexpected decision. Instead of allowing the execution to move forward, he personally commutes the sentence to life imprisonment. The reasoning is deeply political. Truman does not want Collazo turned into a martyr for Puerto Rican radicals. Executing him could inflame the independence movement even further. And while the country is still discussing the attack, Truman returns to public events almost immediately. The day after gunmen opened fire outside his residence, he attends a scheduled military memorial ceremony as if nothing happened. When reporters later ask whether the attack frightened him, Truman answers coldly, "A president has to expect these things." Then he adds something else. "The only thing I really regret is the death of the policeman." The attack in Washington is not an isolated act by two desperate men. It is part of a much larger nationalist uprising already spreading through Puerto Rico. Just 3 days before the shooting at Blair House, armed militants launch coordinated revolts across the island. Government buildings are attacked. Police stations burn. Nationalists attempt to storm the governor's residence. In several towns, open gun battles erupt in the streets. The entire operation is tied to one man, Pedro Albizu Campos. To his followers, Albizu Campos is a revolutionary fighting American control of Puerto Rico. To the FBI, he is the leader of a violent separatist movement preparing political attacks inside the United States. Oscar Collazo and Griselio Torresola are acting under that ideology. Their mission is not simply to kill Truman. They want front-page headlines around the world. They want the White House frozen in shock while the United Nations is forced to look directly at the independence war inside Puerto Rico that Washington is trying to suppress. And for 40 violent seconds outside Blair House, the entire world suddenly notices them. After the attack, Washington changes almost overnight. The Secret Service realizes something deeply disturbing. Two armed nationalists managed to organize inside the United States, reach the Capitol, approach the president's residence, and start a gunfight only meters away from Harry Truman. For federal agents, this is no longer just an assassination attempt. It is a catastrophic security failure. Investigators sweep through Puerto Rican communities across the East Coast. Apartments are searched. Phones are monitored. Suspected nationalist contacts are interrogated for hours by the FBI. Inside Blair House, Truman's security becomes extreme. Bullet-resistant barriers appear throughout the residence, and officers guarding Pennsylvania Avenue are authorized to use lethal force at the slightest sign of danger. The psychological shift is immediate. Before the shooting, Truman openly ignored many security protocols. He loved taking long morning walks through Washington and shaking hands with random pedestrians along the street. After Blair House, the Secret Service permanently ends those walks. From that moment forward, the era of accessible presidents begins disappearing. The President of the United States is no longer treated like a public figure living among ordinary citizens. He is treated like a permanent target. After the trial, Oscar Collazo disappears behind prison walls for decades. Most Americans eventually forget his name, but in Puerto Rico, many nationalists do not. To them, Collazo is not remembered as a failed assassin. He is remembered as a man who attacked the center of American power and survived. He spends 29 years in federal prison. But in 1979, the White House shocks the public. President Jimmy Carter signs a clemency order and releases the attacker from prison. The reaction in Puerto Rico is immediate. When Collazo returns to the island, crowds gather to greet him. Supporters wave Puerto Rican flags, celebrate him publicly, and treat him less like a criminal and more like a political soldier returning home from war. Even after decades behind bars, Collazo never distances himself from the attack at Blair House. Until the end of his life, he continues describing the operation as part of the fight for Puerto Rican independence. The man who once pulled the trigger of a Walther P-38 on the steps outside Blair House dies quietly in his own bed in 1994. Still convinced history would eventually understand why he did it. The gunfight outside Blair House lasts less than 1 minute, roughly 40 seconds of shooting. But the echo of those shots travels far beyond the fall of 1950. The reconstruction of the White House is eventually completed, yet the philosophy of presidential security changes permanently. The idea of an accessible president slowly disappears behind reinforced barriers, controlled streets, armed perimeters, and permanent surveillance. Pennsylvania Avenue transforms from an open public space into one of the most heavily protected political zones in America. And inside the Secret Service, one lesson from Blair House never disappears. Distance means nothing if attackers get close before anyone reacts. In the end, Harry Truman survives because of timing, luck, and one dying police officer who manages to fire a final shot from inside a guard booth. If Oscar Collazo's pistol does not jam, if Leslie Koffelt cannot pull the trigger one last time, the history of the American presidency may change in under a minute. 40 seconds, one misfire, one bullet behind the ear. That is how close the United States came to losing its president outside a temporary residence on a hot afternoon in Washington.